I thought I knew my wife. After more than 20 years together, Harper and I had built a life brick by brick, shared routines, 2 sons, a mortgage we barely kept up with, and 1,000 small understandings that made everything feel stable. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. Or so I believed. When Rowan had pneumonia, we took turns sleeping in that stiff hospital chair, whispering updates like medics in a war zone. When my father died, Harper managed the funeral from start to finish so I could just breathe. She was my teammate, my anchor, my person. So when she put down her fork during dinner one Tuesday night, looked me square in the eyes, and said, "What if we tried an open marriage?" I felt something shatter inside me. At first, I laughed. I waited for the punchline. But Harper didn't flinch. No smile. No warmth. Just calm, steady resolve. Like she was suggesting we repaint the kitchen. "Come again?" I asked, already knowing I'd heard her right. "I've been thinking about it for a while," she said. "I don't think we're unhappy, but we're not free either. Maybe giving ourselves room to explore would help. It might even save us." Free. Explore. All those soft-focus buzzwords people use to dress up destruction. But to me, they landed like blunt trauma. The woman who once wept watching our boys take their first steps was now calmly suggesting we invite strangers into the sacred space we'd built. Harper had always been curious, sure. Lately, she'd been going to personal growth, retreats, talking about energy and authenticity and breaking out of social molds. I thought it was a phase, a midlife recalibration. I never imagined it would come to this. I wanted to say no, that she was wrong, that we could fix whatever this was. But the words got caught. Not because I agreed, but because I was cornered. We were barely paying the bills. Rowan and Ezra were in college out of state. A divorce would financially wreck us. And I wasn't about to tear our sons' lives apart because their parents couldn't figure themselves out. So I swallowed hard, clenched my jaw, and said, "Do what you need to do." And just like that, something in her shifted. Or maybe she stopped pretending. She started coming home later, dressed sharper. Her phone buzzed with laughter I wasn't a part of. Some nights, she didn't come home at all. I stopped asking questions. Not out of indifference, but because I'd quietly accepted I had no right to any answers anymore. We still lived under the same roof, but we'd stopped living the same life. We crossed paths in the kitchen, in the hall, in the shared silence between commercial breaks. No fights, no intimacy, just the dull ache of two people who'd stopped choosing each other. I started spending evenings in my home office, just to breathe. Sometimes I'd catch myself holding my breath when I heard her footsteps, as if hoping she'd pass me by. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by questions with no answers. When did we stop being us? Was it something I did or didn't do? Was I too predictable? Too safe? Maybe. But I was trying. I always thought that's what love was, showing up, holding steady, carrying weight. At work, I was barely functional. My firm, small tech consultancy, was bleeding clients. I was constantly distracted. One afternoon, a senior partner looked at me and said, not unkindly, "You're fading, Nolan. Like a candle with no oxygen." He was right. I was becoming a ghost in my own life. Even speaking to my sons had become mechanical. Sunday video calls were full of smiles I had to practice in the mirror. They never asked about Harper. Maybe they didn't want to know. Or maybe they already did. But I stayed quiet. Out of fear. Out of duty. Because when everything's on the edge of collapse, sometimes you hold still, hoping stillness will stop the fall. That's when the slow unraveling began. The silence in our home changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. Not the kind that comes after a long day and settles into the corners like a warm blanket. No, this silence was cold, hollow. The kind that follows an argument that never happened, but should have. Harper began staying out late. At first, she'd say she was meeting friends or attending workshops. Then the explanation stopped altogether. I stopped waiting up, stopped checking my phone. Some nights, I barely noticed when she came in. Other nights, I pretended to be asleep just to avoid her eyes. She moved into the guest room after a few weeks. Quietly. No conversation. Just one night, I heard the creak of her footsteps down the hallway. The door clicked shut, and from then on, that was hers. We were roommates. Polite. Distant. Two people co-managing a house filled with echoes. We still talked about Rowan and Ezra, their classes, tuition payments, apartment leases, but we sounded like coworkers discussing someone else's kids. We texted more than we spoke. Short, efficient messages about bills, the dog's vet appointment, or who'd pick up groceries. I once reread our thread and realized there wasn't a single word of affection in months. There were no fights, just distance. And sometimes that's worse. You can scream at someone you still care about, but when you stop raising your voice, it's because you've already given up. I started hiding in routine, waking at 6:30, making coffee, skimming headlines I didn't care about, drowning in client calls while the business wobbled beneath me. 2 clients had dropped without warning. A third delayed payment. I was treading water and trying not to show the panic. Meanwhile, Harper seemed lighter. She wore lipstick again, bought new dresses. The house smelled like unfamiliar perfume. I once saw a second wine glass in the sink, marked with lipstick I didn't recognize. I didn't ask. I just washed it, dried it, and put it away. Not because I didn't care, but because I was tired of pretending this was something I could fix. The hardest part wasn't her absence. It was the reminder of her presence, laughter from her phone in another room, the sight of her shadow passing the hallway, the way her cup still sat on the shelf beside mine, like some quiet refusal to move on. Some evenings I'd sit in my car long after pulling into the driveway, just to delay going inside. I'd listen to the engine idle, feel the stillness wrap around me, and wonder how a house so full of memories could feel so empty. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't even sure I remembered how to talk to people anymore. But when one of my clients invited me to a tech seminar in downtown Asheville, I went. Just to be out. Just to breathe somewhere else. It was loud. Crowded. Useless presentations from 20-somethings who thought they'd reinvented email. I stood near the back, checking my messages, waiting for an excuse to leave. That's when I heard a voice beside me. Don't you love being told how to run your business by someone who's never missed a rent payment? I turned. She was in her mid-40s, dark hair tied back, no flash, just a gray jacket, jeans, and the calmest eyes I'd seen in a long time. Leona Hayes. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't talk like a pitch deck. Just real. Solid. The kind of person who makes silence feel safe. I chuckled, surprising myself. I'd probably listen if they covered my rent, I replied. She laughed. Not politely. Really laughed. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something. Not attraction, something deeper. Like someone had looked straight through the fog and saw me. We talked. About nothing, and then everything. Work. Cities. Coffee. What keeps you up at night? She was a brand consultant from Missoula. Thoughtful, sharp, but gentle. She didn't pry. Didn't ask about my marriage. But somehow, I think she knew. At the end of the night, she handed me her card. Just a simple line. If you ever just want to talk, I'm around. I didn't text her right away. I wasn't sure what I wanted. But for days, I kept that card in my pocket. Just in case I remembered how to want something again. I didn't message Leona for a week. Not because I didn't want to. I just didn't trust the part of me that wanted anything anymore. Desire had turned slippery, confused with guilt, obligation, exhaustion. So I waited. I told myself it was professional courtesy. I told myself I was too busy. But the truth? I was scared. Not of her, but of what she represented. Still, one quiet Thursday afternoon, when the house was still and I felt like I was fading again, I opened my phone and typed. Hi, Leona. Coffee still on the table? She replied 10 minutes later. Always. We met at a local cafe, not far from the same seminar where we'd first talked. It was bright inside, not trendy, just warm. With tables, the smell of cinnamon and espresso. She was already there when I arrived, a book in her lap, not checking her phone. That struck me. She wasn't waiting to be entertained. She was just present. The conversation came easy. We talked about work. She asked about my business, not in the polite way people do, but like she genuinely wanted to know. I found myself telling her more than I expected, how the firm had shrunk, how I'd let marketing slide, how I feared the slow erosion more than any sudden failure. She didn't offer solutions. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, nodded, sometimes asked questions that made me think harder. At the end of that coffee, I felt something I hadn't in months, lighter. Not joyful. Not healed. Just less crushed. We started meeting once a week. No agenda. No flirtation. Just two people sharing time. Sometimes we talked about our pasts. Sometimes just about good soup recipes or bad office lighting. But every time I left, I felt a little less like a ghost. Back home, Harper barely noticed. Or if she did, she said nothing. She came and went as she pleased. Still slept in the guest room. Still left her wine glasses out for me to clean. The only difference was I'd stopped caring. Not in the cold, bitter way, but in the done way. One night, after another quiet coffee with Leona, I came home and walked straight to my desk. I looked around and realized something. All the pictures of Harper were gone. Not packed away. Not thrown out. Just no longer there. It hadn't been a dramatic purge. I couldn't even remember when I did it. But they were gone. And the space they left felt right. That weekend, I deep cleaned the house. Not out of obligation. Just because I wanted a fresh start, even if no one noticed. I cleared counters, boxed up old things, rearranged furniture. I wasn't trying to erase the past. I just didn't want to keep tripping over it. On Sunday, during our usual video call, Rowan asked if something was different. "You look better," he said, squinting at the screen. Ezra added, "Yeah, like not so dim." I laughed. A real laugh. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to come back. Leona never asked questions she didn't need answers to. She wasn't trying to fix me. She wasn't trying to become anything. But by simply being there, she gave me a place where I didn't have to explain myself. And sometimes, that's more powerful than any grand gesture. One afternoon, as we finished our drinks, she looked at me and asked, "What do you want, Nolan?" "Not for the business. Not for the kids. Just for you." I didn't answer right away. I stared at the coffee cup, watched the last swirl of cream fade into the black. Then I said, "I want to wake up and not feel guilty just for existing. I want to stop living like every word is an apology." She didn't react with pity. She just nodded. "That's a good place to start," she said. And I believed her. Something had changed. Not loudly. Not like thunder. More like the way sunlight shifts through blinds when no one's watching. But it was there. I began waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The morning air outside our Asheville home smelled cleaner. Even the sound of distant traffic felt less like noise, more like life. I started cooking again. Real breakfasts. Eggs, toast, fresh juice. Not instant oatmeal or cold coffee. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about doing something just for me. Work improved, too. I reorganized my calendar. Reached out to dormant clients. Revised proposals I'd been too tired to fix. Even launched a blog, nothing fancy, just simple posts about helping small businesses stay afloat. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was steering the wheel instead of clinging to the back bumper. And still, once a week, Leona and I met for coffee. No expectations. No subtext. She never pressed, never tried to define what we were. She just made space. The kind of space where you don't have to fill every silence. Where the quiet isn't threatening, it's permission. One day, mid-conversation, she asked something that stayed with me. "If you didn't owe anyone anything, what kind of life would you build?" I didn't know. But that question haunted me in the best way. At home, Harper was rarely around. She'd stopped explaining where she went or who she was with. She had her own rhythm now, a beat that no longer involved me. And honestly, I no longer noticed her absences. That was the scariest part, not that she was gone, but that her absence didn't ache. Our conversations became purely transactional. "There's a leak under the sink. Your card declined the grocery order. Can you pick up the dry cleaning?" All said in a tone that barely masked her frustration at life, at me, at the silence we both had a hand in creating. But I no longer flinched. The old me would have scrambled to fix things. To keep the peace. To apologize, even when I didn't know what for. But that version of me had started to fade. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done trying to hold together something that no longer had weight. One evening, Harper walked in earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen making tea, something earthy Leona had recommended for stress. Harper hovered in the doorway, then stepped in without speaking. She watched me stir the honey, then asked, "You seeing someone?" I didn't lie, but I didn't offer details. "I talked to someone," I said. She didn't respond right away. Then she said, half to herself, "You seem lighter." I nodded. "Yeah, I am." She opened her mouth, closed it, then walked out. That was the last personal thing she ever asked me. And something in me clicked. Not out of defiance. Not revenge. Just truth. That night, I looked around the house and realized something painful but freeing. We weren't just broken. We were finished. The version of us that once existed, with late-night laughter and shared dreams and inside jokes, it was gone. We tried to coexist inside its ghost, but it wasn't a home anymore. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't do it with rage or urgency. I did it because I'd finally accepted that staying was no longer noble. It was avoidance. And the cost of that avoidance had been myself. I didn't tell Leona right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted the decision to be fully mine. When I finally did, over coffee that weekend, I said, I've decided to file for divorce. She looked at me. No judgment. No wide eyes. Just that same grounded stillness I'd come to depend on. Okay, she said. Do it for you. That was all. And it was more than enough. Divorce. A word I used to treat like a grenade, something you keep hidden, unspoken, afraid that saying it might set everything off. But once it left my mouth, it didn't explode. It settled. Like a stone dropped into a deep lake. Final. Quiet. Real. I didn't rush the process. I did what I always did. I planned. I met with an attorney, gathered paperwork, calculated what splitting our lives would cost. Not just money, energy, clarity, peace. For once, it didn't feel like I was burning down my life. It felt like I was walking out of a burning building. When I told Harper, we were in the kitchen. Same table where she'd first mentioned an open marriage. The symmetry of it all wasn't lost on me. I looked at her directly and said, I'm going to file for divorce. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. But something in her hardened instantly. Because of her? She asked, voice like ice. No, I said. Because of me. Because we haven't been us for a long time. And staying just to keep the structure in place isn't helping either of us. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, in a low voice, she said, You're a coward. Using my freedom as an excuse to run away. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I just said, You chose your path. I respected it. Now I'm choosing mine. She stood up sharply, chair legs scraping the floor. You think you'll be happy? With someone who doesn't know you? Who didn't build this with you? I looked at her, not angry, not even sad, just tired and honest. I don't know if I'll be happy, but I know I'm not living like this anymore. That was the moment I knew she finally believed me. Not because of what I said, but because I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was just done. She left the kitchen without another word. The next day, she called a lawyer. Not to file her own papers, but to try and stop mine. She filed a motion, citing emotional duress and claiming the divorce was impulsive. It wasn't. But this wasn't about truth. It was about control. I handed everything to my attorney and kept going. Quietly. Firmly. I didn't scream. I didn't chase her approval. I just kept stepping forward. When I told Rowan and Ezra, it was over video chat, as always. I didn't give them the ugly details. Just said we were choosing different paths, that it was time. There was a long pause. Then Rowan said, You look calm, Dad. Ezra added, Maybe you should have done this sooner. That night, I cried, not from sadness, but from relief. Because for once, I wasn't shrinking to keep the peace. I was standing in my truth. Later that week, I told Leona everything. She listened, same as always, hands wrapped around her mug. I steady. When I finished, she just said, She's not fighting for you. She's fighting to keep her role in your story. That's not love. That's fear. And she was right. Harper wasn't trying to fix what we had. She was trying to hold on to the image of it. The comfort of control. The familiarity of having someone to blame. But I didn't belong to that script anymore. The real strength, I realized, isn't staying no matter what. It's knowing when staying becomes another form of disappearing. And I was done disappearing. After the filing, the tension in the house thickened. Harper started coming home earlier, not to talk, but to make noise. Cabinets slammed. Doors clicked harder. Her footsteps had a message. I'm still here. She complained more about groceries, about how I folded towels, about things that never used to matter. It wasn't about the towels. It was about losing ground. I didn't bite. I didn't argue. I moved through the house like I was already gone, calm, focused, done. But then, one night, it all boiled over. I was grabbing my coat, heading out for a walk, when she blocked the door. Do you think I'm your enemy now? She asked. I turned slowly, looked her in the eyes. No, but you're not my partner anymore, either. Her hands trembled. Voice cracked. I gave you everything. I gave you years. Kids. I stayed when you were working 14-hour days and barely spoke to me. I nodded, gently. And I stayed when you went to retreats, when you stopped coming home, when you needed to find yourself and other people. I didn't leave then. But I'm leaving now. She exhaled hard, almost like a sob, but caught it. Her eyes flashed. You think she won't leave? Leona, you think you're interesting enough to keep her? You're just her project. You're boring. Predictable. Safe. She'll realize that. That landed. But not how she wanted. I breathed in. Maybe she will. Maybe she'll walk away. But if she does, it'll be her choice. And I'll still be okay. Because I'm not building my life around being needed anymore. Harper stared at me. For a moment, I saw something break behind her eyes. Not anger. Not jealousy. Fear. The fear of being left behind. She didn't scream. Didn't throw anything. She just turned and left. The next day, I found out she'd contacted the boys again, Rowan and Ezra, feeding them lines about betrayal, about how I'd destroyed the family. But they were grown now. Sharp. Kind. But clear. They sent me screenshots. One message from Ezra read, "She's hurting, but we see the truth. You're doing what's right." I kept that message. Not to gloat, but to remind myself that clarity sometimes looks like cruelty to the ones still holding on. Leona listened to everything. As always. When I told her Harper had tried to block the process legally, she said something that stayed with me. "She's not afraid of losing you. She's afraid of no longer being the center of your story." And that was it. This wasn't about love. It was about losing her audience. The show was over. I had simply walked off stage. But Harper wasn't done. Not yet. Next came the quiet manipulation. Tea offered in the evening. Sitting across from me like old times. Casual mentions of what-ifs and second chances. "We don't have to go through with it," she whispered one night. "We can just live separately. Keep it simple. No drama for the kids." But there was no warmth in her voice. No vulnerability. Just strategy. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt. And when she was done, I said, "I'm not looking for simple. I'm looking for honest. And we haven't had that in years." The last attempt came quietly. A night like any other. She entered the room wearing that old navy robe she used to wear when she'd wait for me at night. Her hair loose. No perfume. Just nostalgia weaponized. She held 2 glasses of wine. "Let's forget everything for one night," she said. "Just you and me. No labels. No tension." There was no seduction in her voice. Just desperation. I took the glasses gently from her hands, set them on the table, and said, "We can't go back. That version of us is gone." She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't argue. She just whispered, "So, it's real." "Yes," I said. "It's real." She turned, walked away slowly. No yelling. No slamming doors. Just quiet. That night, I slept like I hadn't in years. Not because everything was okay, but because I finally knew this was no longer a crisis. It was closure. The papers were signed on a Monday. No drama. No final argument. Just ink on paper in a lawyer's office with fluorescent lights and too much beige. Harper didn't come. She sent her attorney. That felt fitting. There was nothing left to say. Every emotion had already been worn thin. Every argument already whispered or screamed in one form or another. Now there was just legal formality, check marks on a page. I held the folder in my lap as the final signature dried. No fireworks. No relief. Just a long, still breath. When I stepped outside, Asheville felt louder than usual. Cars. Sirens. A food truck engine sputtering to life. Summer heat clinging to the pavement. It was all ordinary, but I felt it differently. For the first time in years, I could feel space. Not freedom like in the movies. Not an explosion of color or a euphoric song. Just room. Inside my chest. Like I'd been living in a house with the walls closing in, and now the windows had been cracked open. I drove to the cafe where Leona and I first met. She was already there, her back to the window, a book beside her coffee. When she saw me, she stood and opened her arms. No words. Just a quiet, steady embrace. I didn't say anything either. Just held on. Not to her, but to the calm between us. Eventually, she pulled back and asked, "Everything done?" I nodded. "Everything." We sat in silence for a while. A comfortable one. The kind where you don't have to perform. We didn't talk about what came next. We didn't plan the future. And that was the beauty of it. We didn't need to. Later that night, my phone rang. Harper. I considered ignoring it. But I didn't. I answered. Her voice was rough, tired. "Are you happy now?" she asked. It wasn't a challenge. Just a question scraped from the bottom of a bruised heart. I paused, then said, "I'm not sure happy is the word, but I'm at peace." She didn't say goodbye. She just hung up. That was the last time we spoke. In the weeks that followed, the house slowly changed. She came back once to pack her things. Left a few furniture pieces, a photo or two. I didn't touch them. Not out of nostalgia, but because I didn't need to erase anything. The point wasn't to pretend she was never here. The point was accepting that she was, and that now, she wasn't. Sometimes at night, I still thought I heard her footsteps. But they never came. And that silence, instead of hurting, felt clean. Like air after a storm. Leona and I didn't define anything. No declarations. No urgency. We walked, talked, laughed, sat in silence. It wasn't a relationship built on need. It was built on presence. And presence, I learned, is everything. 3 months passed. Not much changed, and yet, everything had. I still lived in the same house. Still brewed the same morning coffee. Still ran my consultancy from the same sunlit corner of my office. The town didn't change. The roads didn't change. But I had. For years, I had been surviving on autopilot. Breathing out of habit. Smiling for my kids, working for my bills, staying for the memory of a love that had already left the room. Now, each day felt like it belonged to me. Not to obligation. Not to guilt. Just to me. Leona and I still met weekly. No rules, no plans, no, where is this going, conversations. We walked, we shared meals, we sat side by side at that same cafe where everything had begun. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. And yet those silences were the most honest moments of all. She once told me during a sunset walk through Riverside Park. You're softer now. Not weaker. Just not bracing all the time. I smiled. She was right. I had stopped living like a man waiting for the next blow. I'd stopped shrinking in someone else's shadow. I didn't need Leona to fill the space Harper had left. She wasn't a replacement. She was a reminder that connection didn't have to cost you your voice. That love didn't mean losing yourself. And for once, I didn't need a title to feel whole. Some nights I'd sit on the back porch with tea in hand, looking at the empty chair across from me. I used to hate that image, the single cup, the quiet hum of the neighborhood, no footsteps coming down the hall. Now, I understood something important. There's a difference between the silence of loneliness and the silence of freedom. One feels like an absence. The other feels like space to breathe. One night, as the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, I stood at the window and thought, this is it. This is what a real beginning feels like. No grand statement. No fireworks. Just the quiet comfort of waking up and not dreading the day. Of not apologizing for your needs. Of being okay, even if no one else is clapping. That's when you know you've healed. Not when the pain stops, but when your identity no longer depends on the person who hurt you. I was finally there. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. The paper smelled faintly of vanilla and dust. It was from Harper. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to hear her voice again, even on paper. But it wasn't an apology. And it wasn't a plea. It was a reflection. She wrote that she'd started therapy. That she was beginning, slowly, to understand her own need for escape. That she'd confused freedom with running, and in the process, she'd hurt people, me, especially. She didn't ask to come back. Didn't try to rewrite the past. She simply said, "Thank you for leaving when I couldn't. For giving both of us the chance to figure out who we really are." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. Not out of sentiment. Just because some stories don't need to be erased. They just need to be set down. These days, I live quieter. Not in a way that's lonely, but in a way that's full. I'm still in Asheville. Still running my consultancy. Still walking the same streets. But now, I notice the trees more. I take time with my food. I call Rowan and Ezra just to chat, not to update or explain. Just to be their dad. Leona is still around. Some nights we cook together, play old records, fall asleep reading on opposite ends of the couch. We still don't define it. And that's okay. It's not about the label. It's about how I feel when I'm around her. Calm. Seen. Alive. I used to think starting over required reinvention. That I'd have to burn down everything to build something new. But I've learned that a new life doesn't always look new on the outside. Sometimes, it just feels different on the inside. Lighter. More honest. More mine. If someone were to ask me now what a new beginning looks like, I'd tell them it's not always dramatic. It doesn't always come with some grand epiphany or perfect day. Sometimes it's just making your own breakfast again. Sometimes it's not hearing your name yelled across the house. Sometimes it's watching the sun rise and realizing you're no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's when you know. You've stopped surviving someone else's story. And finally started living your own.